The alien queen was dying in a room where no one was allowed to touch her. Her doctors watched. Her guards froze. Her laws stood perfect and useless around her collapsing body. Then a human soldier crossed the sterile field, triggered every contamination alarm, and placed 2 fingers on her pulse. The fever stopped. The court saw a miracle. He saw a patient who still had the right to say no. Welcome to Gravity and Stardust. I hope you enjoy this video and have a day filled with happiness. Now, let's begin the story. The Royal Medical Cathedral made every emergency sound polite. Its alarms chimed in clean ascending notes, soft enough for nobles to mistake danger for procedure. Sergeant Caleb Walker hated that before anything else went wrong. Back home, in flood shelters and quarantine gyms, alarms screamed ugly because ugly got people moving. Here, 12 decks inside the flagship Valeth Ascendant, beneath white glass floors and a ceiling woven with silver skin lattice. Even Panic wore ceremonial gloves. Caleb stood behind the outer security rail in a gray Earth Relief Corps uniform that marked him as useful but foreign. 36 years old. White human male. Rescue soldier first, diplomatic escort second, decoration never. His hands stayed folded where the Valeth guards could see them. Human hands made them nervous. Moving human hands made them reach for rifles. At the center of the cathedral, Queen Amara Valeth faced her council beneath a halo of diagnostic glass. Her pastel purple skin had faded toward lavender ash around the temples. A silver medical crown circled her head, its filigree locked against nerve ports behind her long, slender, elf-like ears. Beautiful, yes, but in the controlled way a stained glass window was beautiful during a storm. Lit from behind, cracking where no one wanted to look. High Chancellor Varen Solth stood in the council arc with both hands folded over a black command sash. Her Majesty remains stable, he said. Reports of crown fever progression have been distorted by foreign medical anxiety. Caleb's eyes moved to the pulse strip behind Amara. The line jumped violet, steadied, jumped again. Not stable. Managed. There was a difference, and people died in that difference. The lead physicians hovered behind a sterile field 10 feet from their queen, close enough to diagnose, too far to catch. Sacred contact law made the distance holy. Only the royal physician could touch the sovereign during an active episode. The royal physician had died 6 days earlier in the contamination event everyone kept mentioning like weather. Amara lifted her chin. My body is not evidence for men who need my silence to feel secure. The sentence landed well. It also cost her. Caleb saw her right hand press against her sleeve, saw her knee loosen, saw the medical crown brighten a half-second before the cathedral understood. The violet line tore upward. The polite alarms sang. No one crossed the sterile field. Not the physicians. Not the guards. Not Varen, whose concern arrived perfectly shaped and perfectly useless. Amara folded sideways toward the white glass floor. Caleb moved. Soren shouted from the guard line. Rifles lifted. Caleb heard all of it from far away, through the old tunnel of rescue training where rooms narrowed to impact, airway, pulse. He crossed the sterile field as it crackled across his sleeve and flagged him red on every contamination panel. He slid on one knee and caught Amara before her head struck the floor. Not an embrace. Not a claim. One arm braced her shoulder. 2 fingers found the radial pulse at her wrist because that was where the body still told the truth when politics got loud. Her skin was cool, threaded with a faint electric tremor. The pulse under his fingers fluttered, vanished, then returned against him. The monitor screamed once and cut from violet storm to a narrow blue trace. Not cured. Caleb knew better than that. The crisis had not disappeared. It had been interrupted. Acute stabilization. A life held at the edge, not pulled safely home. Still, the room froze because the machine had stopped asking for royal blood and answered a human touch instead. Varen's voice sliced through the silence. Remove him from the crown body. Caleb kept his gaze lowered to the floor beside Amara's face, giving her the only privacy the cathedral had left. You can arrest me after she's breathing, he said. The blue trace pulsed once beneath the skin lattice. Then again. No him, no law, no crown had done that. Just contact, restraint, and one ugly little signal the cathedral did not know how to make polite. The rifle stayed raised, but the men holding them stopped breathing like soldiers and started breathing like witnesses. Caleb could tell the difference by the tremor in the room. Soldiers followed orders through fear. Witnesses waited for the thing in front of them to become explainable. Queen Amara's pulse moved under his careful pressure, weak but present, and the scan lattice above them painted the proof in blue. Caleb kept his gaze down, fixed on the white glass beside her cheek. She had fallen in front of every house, every physician, every council scribe hungry for language that would make weakness useful. He would not add his face to the crowd waiting to study hers. Captain Soren stood 12 feet away with one hand lifted toward her guards. Pearl armor caught the cathedral light along her shoulders. Her eyes flicked from the rifles to the monitor to Caleb's posture, counting danger in practical increments. High Chancellor Varen crossed the sterile field only after the contamination panels stopped shrieking red. He moved slowly, not from caution, but because men like him believed urgency looked too much like need. "Human," he said, "remove yourself from the sovereign." Caleb did not move. No, the word landed flat. Not defiant. Busy. Varen's mouth tightened by less than an inch. "You are contaminating royal tissue." Caleb watched the blue trace narrow, then widen with Amara's next breath. "I'm interrupting whatever's trying to kill her. That diagnosis is not yours to make." Didn't diagnose it. He shifted the contact point a hair's width, just enough to ease the angle of her wrist. Violet static crawled back into the line. 3 physicians gasped at once. Caleb returned to the exact place where the fever had broken, and the blue trace reformed, thin and stubborn. "Just notice what happens when I stop." Nobody spoke for 2 seconds. That was how long it took the cathedral to understand that the law had become a bystander. Varen turned toward the physicians. "Confirm suppression only. Do not imply treatment." The lead physician's throat worked. Her hands hovered over a glass console that reflected Amara's pale face back in pieces. "Acute neural storm is suppressed at the contact site." "Temporary," Varen snapped. "Yes, temporary." Caleb glanced at Soren. "Captain, if I pull away clean, how fast does she drop?" Varen lifted a hand. "The guard captain does not answer foreign personnel." Soren did not look at him. "Physician." The lead physician lowered her eyes to the live scan. "Destabilization begins in under 4 seconds. Full recurrence likely inside 12. Caleb nodded once, more to himself than anyone else. "Then we've got a bad clock." A soft sound came from Amara. Not a word. A breath reclaiming shape. Her fingers moved first, curling against the glass instead of gripping him. Caleb adjusted his shoulder so she could wake without finding herself held too close. The movement cost him balance, but not contact. Her eyes opened, fever-bright silver beneath the dim crown. They tracked the ceiling, the rifles, Soren, Varen, then the human kneeling beside her and looking pointedly at the floor. "Who touched me?" she asked. Her voice was thin enough to break and trained enough not to. Caleb answered before the Chancellor could make it uglier. "I did, ma'am." Varen stepped in. "A violation of sacred contact law under crisis conditions." Amara's gaze moved to the monitor. "Blue. Narrow. Alive. And the law?" she asked. No one answered. Caleb kept his tone low. "Your Majesty, I'm not holding you. I'm holding a signal your body seems to like better than the room does. If you tell me to stop, I stop." Soren's chin dipped almost invisibly. The physician stared at Caleb as if he had introduced a medical category older than their machines. Amara looked at the space between his body and hers, the careful angle, the lowered eyes, the hand that had not become a claim. Her breathing hurt. She did not let the court see how much. "Do not remove him," she said. Varen bowed because everyone was watching. Caleb felt the room rearrange around those 5 words. Not trust. Not yet. Just a crack in the old order wide enough for a pulse to pass through. The first chair they brought was a throne pretending to be medical equipment. Its back rose too high. Its armrests curved around the body like ownership, and gold contact nodes glimmered along the sides where restraints could hide under the word support. Caleb took one look at it and shook his head. No, Varen's eyes cut toward him. "You are not selecting furnishings." Caleb kept the careful pressure at Amara's wrist, gaze still angled away from her face. "That thing's got lock points. Stabilization requires restraint. Panic requires restraint. Medicine requires permission." The room tightened. Even the polite alarms seemed to pause between notes. Amara's breathing hitched under the silver crown, but her eyes stayed on the chair. She saw the lock points now. Maybe she had always seen them. Maybe she had been trained not to name them in public. Captain Soren moved before anyone ordered her and pointed to a lower emergency seat folded into the cathedral wall. Plain white polymer, no crest, no gilding, no hidden clamp. Caleb could see from 12 feet away. Use that one. Varen turned. Captain. Soren did not blink. It has cleaner access to the scan lattice. A technical excuse. A good one. The lead physician seized it like air. Yes, the emergency chair will give a less contaminated read. Varen hated the word less almost as much as contaminated, but the house channels were still recording, so he allowed the substitution with a nod sharp enough to cut paper. 2 attendants rolled the low chair into the sterile field. Caleb waited until Amara's free hand braced against its arm. I'm going to help you sit, he said. Left shoulder only. You can tell me no. Amara's silver eyes shifted to him. You narrate everything. People like surprises less when they're sick. Queens are not people in this room. He looked at her then, briefly, not enough to study the fever in her face. That seems to be the problem. She gave no smile. The monitor gave one fragile blue pulse. Caleb helped her into the emergency chair with the smallest leverage he could manage, then stepped back as far as the signal allowed. The blue line thinned. Violet static gathered at the edges. Physicians leaned forward. Varen spoke at once. Secure the human's hand and begin continuous contact. Caleb lifted his other hand, palm open. No restraints. You do not dictate medical procedure. I'm dictating what happens to my arm. Your arm is presently preserving the sovereign. Then ask the sovereign what she wants done with it. Silence moved through the cathedral with weight. A council scribe stopped writing. The lead physician looked down at her console as if the answer might appear there and spare her from history. Amara's fingers tightened on the chair arm. Her body wanted the contact. The monitor made that humiliatingly clear. The court wanted to make the decision cleaner by removing her from it. Caleb stood in the middle of both hungers and did not fill the space for either one. What conditions? Amara asked. Her voice had rough edges now. Caleb answered like he had already sorted the room into risks. Live scan. No restraints on either of us. One physician inside the field, hands visible. Captain Soren, where you can see her. Audio record of consent before each contact change. And if you say stop, I stop. The lead physician looked alarmed. Stopping during recurrence could endanger Her Majesty. Caleb nodded once. Then she should know that before she says it. Varen's face hardened. This is absurd theater. Amara turned her wrist over, exposing the place where his careful pressure had kept the fever broken. No, she said. It is the first honest procedure today. Soren signaled the recording system. A small amber light appeared above the chair. Caleb removed his fingers. The blue trace collapsed toward Violet in less than 3 seconds. Pain tightened Amara's mouth, but she did not reach for him. She held her hand out herself, shaking now, furious at the shaking and more furious that the room saw it. Caleb did not move until she met his eyes. Is that yes? He asked. Her answer came thin, precise, and entirely her own. Yes. He set the contact back into place, light as a promise he intended to keep. The violet storm broke. Blue returned across the scan lattice, not wide, not safe, but steady enough for breath. Amara closed her eyes for half a second before reopening them to the court. Caleb watched the monitor instead of her relief. Varen watched both and found no handle. For the first time in the Royal Medical Cathedral, the Queen's survival had passed through her consent before it passed through anyone else's law. The bio-isolation chamber sat beyond the north transept, sealed behind 3 layers of clear shielding and 1 layer of politics. Caleb walked beside the emergency chair as attendants guided it across the white glass floor, his hand hovering close but not touching because Amara's monitor held a thin blue line on its own for the moment. Captain Soren followed on the Queen's right, close enough to catch, far enough not to crowd. Varen stayed outside the chamber glass with the council physicians, his reflection laid over every surface like a stain that knew how to bow. Inside, the air smelled of chilled mineral antiseptic and hot circuitry. The chamber had no banners. That helped. Machines were easier to argue with when no one had dressed them as history. The lead physician locked the live scan above the chair. Controlled replication trial. We will map the human stabilizing signal and reproduce it through sterile transfer. Caleb looked at the silver contact drone unfolding from the wall, its padded arm tipped with a soft conductive patch. You're going to fake me with a wall spider. The physician hesitated. In less crude language, yes. Amara sat straighter despite the fever shadow under her eyes. Proceed. Caleb glanced at her wrist, then back to the drone. No contact from me during the first pass? Correct, the physician said. If replication succeeds, your presence becomes unnecessary. Varen's mouth softened at that word. Unnecessary. Caleb heard the relief in it and did not trust it. The drone lowered to Amara's exposed pulse point and released a clean green waveform modeled from Caleb's scan. The lattice brightened. For 1 second, violet static broke apart. Then the machine corrected itself. It smoothed the uneven intervals, cleaned the micro-delays, polished the signal into something mathematically elegant. The violet storm returned harder. Amara's fingers dug into the chair arm. Soren stepped forward. Caleb was already there, but he stopped short of the queen's skin. Yes, he asked. Amara's jaw tightened around pain. Yes. He set his careful pressure where the drone had failed. No drama. No grip. Just living contact, warm and imperfect. The scan changed at once. His rough green rhythm entered the map full of tiny skips, stress tremors, heat variants, a stubborn mess the chamber kept trying to classify. Where it crossed the violet loop, the storm broke into blue. The physician stared upward. The filter damaged the effect. Say it clearly, Soren said. The physician swallowed. The signal works only when the irregularities remain intact. Caleb breathed out through his nose. That's a weird compliment. The chamber did not laugh. His hand began to shake before the blue line fully settled. Not the small tremor from before. This one climbed from his wrist into his forearm, pulling at old nerves beneath the skin. A secondary monitor caught his heart rate spiking, then trying to hide inside a soldier's posture. He shifted his feet to stay balanced. Amara saw the adjustment. She saw the sweat at his temple, the way he kept his face turned toward the scan instead of making pain available for sympathy. It is taking from you, she said. Caleb watched the blue line hold. It's borrowing badly. That is not an answer. It's the answer I can give while your chancellor's taking notes. Varen touched the outside glass. Maintain contact until recurrence risk is eliminated. Caleb looked at the physician. Is she stable right now? The physician checked the scan twice, then nodded. A temporary baseline has returned. Caleb lifted his hand immediately. The drone lights dimmed. Amara remained upright. The monitor stayed blue for 5 seconds, then 10. His fingers curled once at his side, still trembling, empty on purpose. Varen's reflection hardened. Premature termination compromises data. Caleb stepped back from the chair. No, it proves I'm not a clamp. Amara looked down at the place on her wrist where his hand had been. The skin showed no mark. The absence seemed louder than contact. Every law in the cathedral had been built to keep her body under control. The human had touched her, steadied her, suffered for it, and removed his hand the instant help stopped requiring pressure. The machine had failed by making him perfect. He had succeeded by staying human, and then by letting go. The second recurrence did not arrive like a seizure. It arrived like a memory the body had tried to bury. Amara's monitor thinned from blue to a bruised violet edge while the chamber argued over data ownership, and Caleb saw the change before the physicians named it. He had learned that skill in places with bad coffee and worse lighting, where monitors whispered trouble before people admitted they were scared. He stepped closer, stopped short, and waited for her eyes. Varen's voice cut through the glass. Resume stabilization. Caleb did not look at him. Not his call. Amara's fingers pressed into the plain chair arm. The silver crown around her temples flickered, trying to correct a rhythm it still did not understand. She held herself upright for 3 breaths. Pride carried the first. Training carried the second. The third belonged to pain. She extended her wrist. Yes. Caleb made the contact small and exact. The chamber lights dimmed around the scan lattice as his uneven green signal crossed her violet storm. The fever broke, but something else opened with it. Caleb smelled disinfectant sharp enough to sting his throat, then rainwater soaked into gym mats, then canned peaches from a relief crate warmed by a failing generator. The glass chamber disappeared. A quarantine shelter took its place for 1 breath. Rows of cots under fluorescent lights, clear plastic dividers taped from floor to ceiling, A little boy sitting alone behind one of them with an oxygen strip under his nose and a stuffed dinosaur tucked under his arm. A younger Caleb sat outside the safe line in a folding chair, boots planted, mask fogging with every breath. Someone off-screen said shift was over. The boy asked if voices could still get through plastic. Younger Caleb leaned back like the chair was comfortable and said, "Yeah, buddy. I'm loud when it counts." The memory snapped away before Caleb could lock it down. Amara saw enough. He felt it in the way her pulse changed beneath his hand. Then her memory answered. She was 9, maybe 10, standing beneath a coronation canopy too heavy for a child's shoulders. Her pastel purple skin glowed with fever under ceremonial light. A smaller medical crown bit behind her ears. Her hands trembled inside embroidered sleeves while nobles watched from a hall polished bright enough to reflect shame. A tutor bent near her face and whispered, "The crown does not tremble." Child Amara folded her fingers into the seams until the shaking disappeared from public view. The chamber returned. Caleb's jaw had tightened. Amara saw that too, and that seemed to cost her more than the fever. She began to pull away. Caleb lifted his hand before her wrist moved half an inch, breaking contact cleanly. The monitor flashed violet. He held his fingers above the space between them, not following, not rescuing without permission. "Stop," he asked. The word was plain. It gave her back the room. Outside the glass, Varen leaned toward the speaker. "Do not interrupt the trial." Soren stepped into his line of sight, one armored shoulder blocking the chamber controls. Amara looked at Caleb's hovering hand. It shook openly now. No ceremonial disguise. No crown to hide it. Just cost. She returned her wrist to the contact point herself. "Continue." He obeyed without victory in it. The fever settled. Neither of them spoke until the scan regained blue. Shared pain did not make them intimate. It made them careful. That was harder and cleaner. Amara's voice dropped beneath the machines. "Does it take something from you?" Caleb kept his eyes on the waveform, where his living irregularities kept breaking what perfection had made worse. "Mostly sleep, Sergeant, and a few doors I keep shut." That was closer to truth than he wanted to give in public. She accepted it by not asking for more. When the baseline held, he removed his hand at once. His fingers remained empty between them, trembling in the cold chamber air. Amara looked from that emptiness to the child coughing in Caleb's memory, then to the crown still trying to make her steady by force. For the first time, she understood the difference between being saved and being used. The human had shown her both wounds and chosen not to press either one. Varen waited until Caleb's hand left Amara's wrist before he closed the room around them. The isolation door sealed with a soft white click, too gentle for a prison and too final for medicine. Caleb heard locks in that sound anyway. He had heard them before in quarantine wings where administrators called fear containment and then forgot there were people inside. Captain Soren turned toward the door panel. Her access band flashed red before her fingers reached it. "Chancellor." Varen stood beyond the glass, posture smooth, voice carried through the chamber's speakers without a crack in it. "Emergency continuity statute is now active. Sergeant Caleb Walker is designated a Royal Biostabilization Asset, pending safe mechanical replication." The words arranged themselves like a clean table over something rotten. Caleb flexed his trembling hand once and let it hang open at his side. "Asset's a little cold. Accurate language prevents diplomatic confusion." "Funny. It usually starts it." Amara remained in the emergency chair, back straight, face pale beneath the silver crown. The monitor held blue for now, but the line had thinned since contact ended. She looked at the sealed door, then at the medical drone unfolding from the wall with a padded harness looped beneath its arm. Not a weapon. Worse, a device that had already decided what part of Caleb mattered. Varen continued. "The human will remain in the medical wing. Contact will be applied under physician authority during recurrence events. His comfort will be respected within operational necessity." Caleb looked at the harness. That sentence ever work on anybody awake? The lead physician stared at her console. Shame moved across her face and found nowhere public to stand. Soren stepped between Caleb and the drone, not drawing a weapon, just making the machine recalculate its path around her body. "Your Majesty, Guard Command did not authorize restraint." Varen's eyes stayed on Amara. Guard Command answers to continuity when the throne is biologically unstable. Amara's fingers tightened on the chair arm. Caleb noticed the monitor edge violet. He did not move toward her. He waited. That waiting struck her harder than Varen's order. The fever wanted a hand. The law wanted a tool. Caleb gave neither without her. Amara reached up and unlocked the silver medical crown from behind her ears. The chamber reacted instantly. Physicians stepped forward. The monitor sharpened violet. Varen's voice lost its polish for one syllable. Majesty. She lifted the crown clear with both hands. Without it, her long pointed ears trembled slightly before she steadied them. She set the crown on the chair arm like an object that had forgotten it was only metal. Record royal directive, she said. Soren's wrist plate lit. Recording. Caleb shifted his weight, eyes on the monitor. Your numbers are getting rude. Then ask me properly, Amara said. He understood before Varen did. Caleb raised his shaking hand and held it above the contact point, close enough to help, far enough to leave the choice hers. Do you want contact? Her breath caught. Not from fever this time. Yes. He touched the pulse point. The violet edge broke, blue returning in a narrow line. The drone froze with its harness half raised, trapped between statute and sovereign voice. Amara looked through the glass at Varen. No person becomes property because they help me live. Varen bowed his head by the minimum inch. The houses will call this recklessness. They may use the public channel. Your next recurrence may not wait for philosophy. Caleb kept his careful pressure steady and said nothing. Amara did not need him to. She placed her free palm against the inside of the door glass. Open it. The panel stayed red. Soren turned her wrist plate toward the lock. Royal directive outranks continuity if the sovereign is conscious and recorded. The lead physician finally lifted her head. That is correct. Varen looked at her as if accuracy had betrayed him personally. The panel flickered from red to white. The door opened 6 inches, then wider, spilling cathedral light across the chamber floor. Caleb did not smile. Amara did not thank him. The blue line pulsed between them, temporary and costly and alive. Outside, the court had just watched a cure become a cage and a queen choose the hand that asked before closing. The door opened into a cathedral that had stopped pretending the crisis belonged to one body. Amber panels blinked across the scan lattice, first above the council arc, then over the side galleries, then down into the service corridors where no noble had been looking. The system tried to bury them under secondary alerts. Caleb saw the pattern anyway. Triage made a man rude to hierarchy. He kept the small bridge of contact at Amara's wrist while his eyes tracked the new signals blooming through the air. Those aren't hers. The lead physician pulled one display closer, then another. Her face changed before her mouth found permission. Mild resonance loops. Non-royal signatures. Varen stepped through the opening fast enough to lose his ceremony for half a second. Close that panel. Soren moved first. She planted herself between him and the physician's console, pearl armor catching the amber light. Leave it open. Varen's voice lowered. Captain, you are standing in a restricted medical hierarchy. Looks crowded. Caleb looked past them toward the east balcony. A young apprentice leaned against a supply column with both hands pressed to his ribs, trying to breathe quietly. 2 attendants in gray service bands sat on the lower steps, one rubbing the other's fingers to keep them from curling. Near the utility arch, an elderly kitchen worker held an oxygen mask meant for a noble face, too large at the edges, fogging unevenly against her pastel purple skin. A child in a silver training collar watched the adults lie with their posture and copied them badly. Caleb felt Amara's pulse kick under his fingers. The monitor narrowed blue, then held. Your lower ward's lighting up, he said. Varen turned toward him. You will not interpret Valeth medical infrastructure. Then interpret the kid trying not to fall over. The physician expanded the map despite the chancellor's stare. Gold resonance lines ran from the medical crown relay through the noble filtration system, then branched downward in thinner routes to staff corridors, apprentice stations, waste recovery, kitchen air, laundry heat. Filtered down. Degraded. Still perfect enough to do damage. Caleb leaned closer to the map without pulling Amara off balance. That gold line feeds all of them. The physician nodded once. Palace life support resonance. It stabilizes the royal symbiote during public procedure and destabilizes everyone else when it goes bad. That is not established. No, it's just blinking in amber. Varen cut in, each word polished hard. The public record will not describe common service reactions as crown fever. The houses cannot see the sovereign's condition reflected in staff physiology. Amara looked through the chamber door at the lower ward entrance, still sealed beneath a crest of silver vines. Behind its glass, more bodies had gathered because illness knew where the beds were even when law denied them. A little girl coughed into her sleeve and looked ashamed of the sound. Amara's free hand tightened around the removed crown resting on the chair arm. Caleb noticed. He also noticed she did not ask him to speak for her. Good. Queens needed their own ugly alarms. How many? She asked the physician. The woman checked the live count. 32 symptomatic outside royal clearance. Possibly more in service decks. Varen stepped close enough that his shadow crossed Amara's knees. Majesty, opening those doors broadcasts weakness across every house channel. Succession confidence may fracture before we isolate the cause. Caleb kept his eyes on the sealed lower ward. People are already fracturing. Amara drew a slow breath. The contact point trembled between them, not from Caleb this time. Can the lower ward be opened without routing them through noble triage? The physician hesitated, then nodded. Manual override. It will publish unsorted scans. Good. Varen's face hardened. You would spend royal privacy on servants? Amara lifted the silver crown and placed it into the physician's hands. The woman nearly dropped it. Use its relay for them. It is calibrated to you. Then make it less loyal. Caleb's mouth almost moved. He stopped it. The moment was not his. Amara turned toward the cathedral microphones, pale but upright, one wrist still resting under human steadiness by choice, not capture. Open all medical doors. Admit by symptom, not rank. Publish the scans. The lower ward unlocked with a long mechanical breath. Soren crossed the floor and lifted the first child through before the nobles remembered whether helping was allowed. The amber map, filled with names the old system had never meant to show. The blue line at Amara's side held because truth had finally been given somewhere to go. The lower ward filled in uneven waves, not by rank, but by breath. Children came first because Soren made it impossible to argue with the way she carried one under each arm. Attendants followed with elders, kitchen workers, apprentice technicians, and two noble clerks who had spent their lives pretending they did not know the names of the people who cleaned their rooms. The Royal Medical Cathedral tried to tag them into categories. Gold for house blood, gray for staff, silver for training caste. The scan lattice kept sorting until Amara's command forced it to show only symptoms. Violet loops bloomed over every cot. Smaller than hers, weaker, but shaped by the same perfect failure. Caleb stood beside the central console with the contact point still active at Amara's wrist, his pressure light enough that she could leave it any time and firm enough that the blue line stayed alive. His hand trembled openly now. He had stopped hiding it. Hiding cost energy, and the room had better uses for lies. The lead physician wired Amara's silver crown into an auxiliary relay with emergency tape and two shaking hands. Royal filigree met field clamps meant for storage carts. The crown looked less holy immediately, which improved it. First replication pass, the physician said. Filtered human carrier through crown relay. The field hummed across the lower ward. A child's monitor shifted blue for half a second, then snapped violet again. 3 more followed. Failures, quick and clean. Varen, held outside the active ward line by Soren's guards, found his voice at once. The human remains necessary. Caleb looked at the failed waveforms. Or your machine still trying to make me respectable? The physician froze, then pulled up the raw scan from the isolation chamber. Caleb's living signal crawled across the display in rough green. Micro delays, skin heat variance, pulse jitter, stress tremor, tiny changes no polished Valeth device would have allowed to survive calibration. Beside it, the crown relay output gleamed smooth and useless. Amara saw the difference before the physician spoke. You cleaned it. The physician's face tightened. We standardized it for safe distribution. Don't, Caleb said. He nodded toward the cots. Safe isn't the same as alive. The physician removed 3 filters, then a 4th. The relay shuddered as the crown carried an ugly, diluted version of the human pattern into the ward, uneven by design, imperfect on purpose. This time, the violet loops did not vanish. They loosened. They lost rhythm. One cot monitor turned blue and stayed there. Then another. An old kitchen worker stopped fighting the mask. A child began crying, not from pain now, but because her body had found enough air to waste on fear. No one cheered. Relief moved smaller than that. Shoulders lowered. Hands unclenched. A noble took off his embroidered outer coat and folded it under a servant's head before he could remember who was watching. The physician stared at the improving lines. It is not a cure. It is buying time. Caleb nodded. Best medicine usually does. She began the purge sequence on the palace life support resonance, dialing down the perfect gold frequency that had fed the crown and poisoned the corridors beneath it. The ward lights flickered from ceremonial white to plain emergency amber. Amara looked at her crown humming under tape, saving people badly and beautifully because it was no longer trying to serve only her. Her own monitor held blue without direct contact for 5 seconds. Then 10. Caleb lifted his hand before anyone told him to. The empty space at her wrist felt colder than the touch had. Varen saw it and reached for Law. Amara saw it and reached for the console. Keep the field irregular, she ordered. Purge the source. Treat every loop before every title. Caleb flexed his shaking fingers at his side. That's going to annoy a lot of important people. Amara watched Soren adjust a child's mask with a strip torn from her own sleeve. Good, she said. They've had very comfortable medicine. The crown kept humming from the relay table, wrapped in tape, stripped of ceremony, finally useful because it had stopped sitting above anyone. By the time the purge sequence reached the service decks, the cathedral no longer knew which parts of itself were royal. Emergency amber washed over the white glass floor. Noble coats had become blankets. Staff carts held skin units. The silver crown, wrapped in tape and wired to a relay table, carried an uneven pulse field through the lower ward while physicians watched violet loops loosen into blue one cot at a time. It had kept them stable long enough for the real repair to begin. Caleb stood near the console with his right hand open at his side, fingers still trembling from the borrowed signal. Amara saw the tremor and said nothing about it. Naming a cost in public could turn it into inventory, and Varen understood inventory better than mercy. He approached with a decree slate held flat in both hands, his robes spotless in a ward where everyone else had picked up marks from helping. The houses require assurance, he said. Until mechanical replication reaches full reliability, Sergeant Walker will remain aboard under royal protection. Caleb glanced at the slate. That word keeps showing up around locked doors. Protection is not confinement. Soren, standing beside the ward entrance with one sleeve torn from mask straps, looked over. Depends which side of the door writes it. Varen ignored her and faced Amara. Majesty, the field is temporary. The purge is incomplete. If the human leaves and recurrence strikes during succession review, every life saved here becomes politically irrelevant. The old logic returned dressed as care. Keep the cure. Contain the risk. Call possession continuity. Around them, patients listened from cots and steps and borrowed chairs. A little apprentice held an oxygen mask to an elderly worker's face with both hands. The ward had become too crowded for polite lies. Amara touched the inside of her wrist where Caleb's contact had been and found only the memory of pressure. Her monitor held blue without him. Thin, but steady. Public scan, she said. The lead physician looked up. Majesty. Full record. Dependency test. Varen's eyes narrowed. Caleb did not move toward her. He waited until she extended her wrist, then waited one beat longer. Do you want contact? Amara met his eyes in front of every house channel. Yes. He placed 2 fingers at the pulse point, lighter than before, barely more than a signal crossing skin. The lattice opened above them. Caleb's rough green rhythm entered the field. Amara's blue line did not change. No violet surge answered when the physician reduced contact mapping by half. No collapse came when Caleb lifted his hand away after 10 seconds. The crown relay kept humming. The lower ward kept breathing. The scan wrote the truth where even politics could read it. Useful contact, no present dependency. Varen stepped forward. The recurrence interval remains unknown. Amara took the decree slate from him. For 1 second his face softened, mistaking survival for surrender. She pressed her royal seal to the slate and erased it clean. Sacred contact law is amended under emergency sovereign authority, she said. Her voice was not loud. It did not need to travel far. The microphones did the work the old court would have hidden. Consent outranks continuity. Medical access cannot create ownership. No healer becomes property. No patient becomes a symbol before they are a person. The ward stayed silent. Not empty silent. Receiving silent. Varen's mouth opened around an objection that had survived centuries and found no air left in the room. Caleb stepped back from the console. That'll make your committees miserable. Amara looked at the taped crowns saving servants from a relay table, then at the nobles sitting shoulder to shoulder with cooks beneath emergency light. They need exercise. Soren lowered her rifle fully for the first time that day. The small movement sounded louder than ceremony. Caleb turned toward the cathedral exit. No guards blocked him. No drone followed. No royal hand reached to keep the cure close. Amara let him walk 3 steps before she spoke. You could have held on. He paused, not turning all the way back. His empty hand hung between them, still shaking a little, still his. That's how healing turns into a leash. Then he continued toward the open door. Behind him, the queen did not put the crown back on. Outside the glass, stars slid past the flagship in patient silence. Inside, a court that had worshipped control for generations learned mercy from a human touch and from the space it left behind. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope this story left a quiet spark somewhere in your heart. Share your thoughts in the comments and tell us which moment stayed with you most. Don't forget to subscribe to Gravity and Stardust for more emotional sci-fi stories. See you in the next journey.